What's up, guys? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow. Tonight, I want to talk about something that I had to learn the hard way, that there absolutely isn't no love in the dope game. Once upon a time, I thought love looked like surviving chaos together, that if we went through withdrawals, if we went through the struggle together, if we got locked up together, I believe that made us closer, than thieves. If we made it out of situations we absolutely shouldn't have, I thought that meant something real. But surviving destruction isn't the same thing, it's building a life. And one of the clearest days that, showed me that was the day I can honestly say God saved me twice. And, it was supposed to be a normal day. Well, what was a normal day in that life? And it turned into one of those days where everything just started going sideways. So, first we gotta rewind a couple days before. So at this time, we're trying to go to our first methadone appointment. And if anybody is on methadone or you have, the first appointment takes 3 hours. It's the long one. They got to get all your information. Well, the Medicaid ride never came back. They had left us. And, I thought if I would have made it home, I would have had a ride to court because I had court the next morning for child support. It wasn't even for something that I was going to get locked up for. But, the Medicaid ride left us and we were stuck. But, earlier, we did what fiends do when you got something coming. We called the card that we knew money was coming on, and we were always looking for it. So that day we called the card and the money had hit. But, I already had a warrant for my arrest. I was a mess. I was strung out bad. And, that life never gets any easier. So after, we wander around all night. We're stranded in a town. So we did what a lot of addicts do when they're stuck with nowhere to go. We just wandered around, going places we probably shouldn't have. And I called everybody I knew looking for a ride. And, that's one of the first lessons addiction teaches you is, you're in that life alone. You really cannot depend on anybody, and at least the way you think you can. So that next morning, we had some money in our pockets, we get to leave, but I had a warrant for my arrest hanging over my head. So, instead of slowing down or making any better decisions, we did what we always did when we moved around the city, hitting different spots, going to shady places, linking up with different characters, checking out different products, going shopping, like we were just floating through the day. And at one point, I even decided, I wasn't a felon yet, that I wanted to go to the pawn shop and look at buying a firearm. And, looking back, that alone could have taken my life in a completely different direction. My cousin dropped us off nearby, and, we were just walking around. I was looking through the windows of the store, trying to, figure out what, I had money. I wanted to spend that shit. And somebody called the police saying that there were 2 suspicious looking people looking through the windows. And they weren't wrong. I was one of them. And when the officer pulled up, it was a lady officer. I already knew I was fucking done. I was cooked. I knew I had a warrant. I knew I was gone at least. I knew I was going to jail. But what scared me more than anything wasn't the warrant. It was everything I had on me. Because they got me when I was looking in the pawn shop. So they started searching me, and syringes just keep falling out of my pockets, one after another. And while he was focused on picking up these rigs, he never saw the bag that had fallen near my feet. And I saw it the whole time. My heart dropped. I started crying. I'm not going to lie. I started crying because I thought it was over. If he had found that bag, everything was about to change for me and get a whole lot fucking worse than the warrant. The girl I was with, she leaned in like she was giving me a kiss goodbye. But while standing there, she put her hand over the bag quietly and, didn't move until they took me away. And, I went to jail on the warrant, no possession charge, and I'm like, gosh, lucky. That alone should have been enough to stop me right there. But the story, it doesn't end. When I got to booking, I thought I was already cleared, that they had searched me. But remember, it was a lady cop. I figured everything had been found out. But after another search, when a man does it, another syringe fell out of my pocket. And this one wasn't a clean one. This was a loaded one with a purple substance. And the officer looked at it, and he looked at me and he asked, "What is that in there?" And I said, "Man, it's Febreze, it's cleaner. I was trying to clean it out." He looked at it and he tossed that shit in the trash and moved on, and I thanked God. I didn't test it, just back then, I was worried about being sick, and I knew I was going to. I was worried about the girl I left on the outside. I was worried about everything except what it actually meant. And, that I walked away from a situation lighter than I should have, because looking back now, I see it differently. That was God saving me twice. It had to be. Not because I deserved it, not because I was doing anything right, but because I was being given mercy. I just didn't see it. I saw it as luck. I didn't want to earn, 2 separate moments that should have stacked my life up with consequences, and didn't. But at that time, I thought it was, just bad luck. But looking back, it was karma. It was chaos. And now I see that in a way it was protection and a reminder that even in the middle of, being in that life, even in the middle of self-destruction, that there were moments where, I was pulled out of things I didn't even have the sense to fucking run from. And that's something that I don't forget anymore. Next, I'm going to talk about how that connects to something I didn't fully understand at the time. So, obviously, the name of the title is There Ain't No Love in the Drug Game. And I used to think there was. I used to confuse loyalty. I thought if somebody was spending every day with you, when things were ugly, if they were there when we were sick, when we were broke, when we were strung out and losing everything, that meant that they cared about me. And, but in that life, people, they just want to take what they can get. People aren't standing next to you because they love you or care about you. They're standing there next to you because of what they can get out of you. You're both stuck in the same chaos as long as, you're useful to each other. And then once the connection feels like love, it's crazy. The second things get real, the consequences show up and everybody starts looking out for themselves. I've seen it time and time again. In the story I just told, when everything was going bad, nobody was coming to save us. And I knew that. When I was stuck, nobody showed up. When, the pressure came, it was just me trying to figure it out and her trying to figure it out. And even in that moment, what, looked like loyalty was really just two people trying to survive the same storm. And that's, what I thought it was all about. The game, it builds these fake bonds where you think somebody is your brother, they're your person, your girl, but really you're just each other's coping mechanism. And the moment the money runs out, or the police show up, or somebody gets sick or locked up, or the bond breaks, because it was never real to begin with. It was just shared destruction. That's the only words for it. And I had to learn that shit the hard way. That love doesn't look like sitting in chaos with somebody, Love looks like building something outside of chaos. And that's why I say there ain't no love in the drug game. Because if that world, in that world, everything is conditional. Everything has an expiration date. Even you. even the people you think, are gonna ride for you, that they're gonna hold shit down, they're really just trying to make it through their own situation. And once I started seeing that clearly, I couldn't unsee it anymore. And if this sounds all too familiar to you, then listen to me right now. Especially if you've been in one of these types of relationships where somebody says they love you, says they chose not to enable you, and you kept choosing the drugs anyway. I need you to hear this clearly, That person isn't going to be there forever. The person waiting on you to get your shit together. And what feels like love in the moment might actually just be a trauma bond. And, keeping you stuck feels intense. It feels real. And it feels like, somebody understands you on your worst days. But a lot of times it's just two people holding each other in the same exact place. But I could say it because I fucking lived it, and I had people who I cared about very much and who I thought cared about me, who I, genuinely still have love in my heart for, but they couldn't follow me into my new lifestyle. None of them could save me. I only could save myself. And for a long time, I was confused, with that abandonment. And really, it was boundaries that, they just weren't there. And I kept choosing the substances over everything else. I kept choosing chaos. I kept choosing that cycle. But what I didn't understand back then is that those bonds, they don't last. Not because people stop caring, but because eventually they have to save themselves and they can't worry about you. Eventually, they have to stop participating in your destruction. And when that happens, you're left alone. You're left alone with the very thing you were avoiding the whole time. And, I'm not preaching. I'm telling you this because I've been on both sides of that shit. I know what it feels like to think, this is my person. This is my ride or die. And when it's really just shared pain keeping you connected. But that pain doesn't protect you. It doesn't build anything. And it doesn't grow with you. It just holds you in place, going over and over again until something breaks and forces you to change. And I'm not gonna lie, I had fun sometimes. I really did. In that sense, that chaos can feel like a rush you've never felt before. When you're in it. But at a certain point, life forces you to deal with what you've been avoiding. It always does for me anywhere. There's always a moment where the consequences stack up, where everything catches up, and where the people around you step back, and where the situation stops being controllable, and you're left with the decision that you can't fucking run from anymore. And that's what I had to learn. That's the hard way. And if you're in that place right now, thinking that this is just how it is, it's not. Just know it doesn't have to stay that way. And when I look back on everything I called love in, that place in my life, I realized that none of that shit was love. All of it was survival. It was trauma bonding. It was two people clinging to each other while everything around them was falling apart. And, we thought if we could make it through withdrawals, if we could make it through hard times together, if we could stay up for days and just ride together, that, if we could keep each other from, getting sick or, locked up, that meant it was real. But, again, that wasn't building anything. That was just staying stuck in the same bullshit. Calling it loyalty because we didn't know anything better. Real love, it doesn't show up in chaos. For me, It showed up when I finally started getting honest, when I stopped chasing people who only, knew me in my worst moments and started being around people who, actually wanted me alive, not just available. I found real love. I did, in my daughter getting to see me sober and actually being present, not just, physically there in a daze, but mentally there. Remembering conversations, I love that. Showing up on time, being a hard worker, keeping promises, being depended on. I found it in my wife standing right next to me when I had nothing to offer but recovery. Not money, not status, not chaos, just effort. That's all I had and a dream. And she still chose to build with me. I found it in the small things. And, when you wake up from that shit and you wake up clear-headed, going to work every day, it feels good. You're not chasing anything just to get through. Being able to sit with myself without, feeling disgusted or running from who I am is such a great feeling. And that's what real love looks like. You got to love yourself before you can love anybody else. It's not intensity. It's not destruction. It's not consistency. People need peace. It's people, who just don't survive with you. It's people who help build you. People who think past tomorrow. So if you're still in that cycle and you're thinking that pains mean love, hear this video again. I get it. I've lived there for a long time. But eventually you start to realize real love doesn't keep you stuck. It pulls you forward. And that's where I finally, found myself. I'm happy to share this one with you. I got some fire coming y'all's way. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.